I should have known when they were showing rated G and PG trailers beforehand, but when Dora the Explorer showed up, I knew I was in the wrong place. So that was how my day started. I was planning to go see this movie at 12 o'clock, and I went there, and I'm sitting there in the theater. I was the only one, and the trailers are playing, and it took me a little bit to recognize that the trailers, they were trailers for kids' movies. And I was like, this doesn't seem right. I left the theater, went into some other theaters to check. No, the Nun was playing across the way. That wasn't the right one. Go up and ask the people. Found out that this movie had been canceled. I was supposed to get an email. I never got an email. So I had to come back later tonight and see their evening showtime. That was frustrating, but I finally got around to seeing it. And I have to say, this film did with demonic possession, horror, what the Exorcist believer failed at doing. And that was to create a solidly written possession horror movie. Some things that I liked about this film, and there were quite a few. I was reading a review about it, or a headline in an article about it, and it said, I copied it because it says, "When Evil Lurks review, a horror movie that dares you not to look away. Can you handle it?" And there were moments where I absolutely had to look away, but not for the reason you think. I can handle quite a bit of gore, and there was a bit of pretty explicit gore in here, but when it comes to things being pulled out of the mouth, I can't handle that. I had to look away multiple times when that scene was happening. So, yeah. I guess in a sense, the answer is I can't handle it. I was just like, oh, I can't. So this movie gets started off very quickly. It does not waste time getting to the point that something awful is happening. It starts off with these two brothers. They hear some gunshots. They go to investigate the next day. They're in this remote area of some little, like a outskirts of a town or something, like farmland area. And I believe it's supposed to be in Argentina. I know the director is Argentinian. I think the actors are too. I was hearing some different dialects though, like in the people that lived at this house, they had a different Spanish dialect than this main actor did, and other actors in the movie did. They almost sounded Mexican or something other than Argentinian. I don't know. I might be completely wrong, but I'm assuming this takes place in Argentina because also there's a character that mentioned something about Buenos Aires. So whatever, it doesn't matter. It takes place in this remote-ish sort of area, but there are moments where they're going to like a city nearby, a town. So it starts off right away. It's pretty well paced, and I like that they just did not drag their feet at all getting you started with the story. There was no build-up introducing you to the characters and then this and this and this and this, and then something happens to pivot the story. No. First scene, they hear gunshots. They go to investigate the next day. And this movie just goes on from there. There's really no downtime, but it's not so action-packed that it feels like you're getting desensitized to it. There's always this feeling of dread. Well, for me, there was, because I knew this was a movie about demonic possession. And though demonic possession movies don't do too much for me, this was crafted in such a way that it did give me this feeling of dread. And I think also part of it is because this story presented the demon or the demonic stuff that was happening almost like a virus. It could transfer to somebody or something else. So that made it a bit more scary, right? You know, it wasn't like it was just stuck in this one person. How do we get it out? No, it's in somebody, but it can also move to somebody else, or it can send parts of itself to somebody else. Something else about this film that definitely distinguishes itself from American Hollywood types of movies. This film did not hold back at all when it came to showing violence against children. And it startled me when the very first one happened. I knew it was coming But the fact that it showed it so explicitly was like, oh wow. So I thought they did a really good job at pulling no punches. I mean, they really did not. They did not hesitate to show you some really hard-hitting, disturbing imagery. And I don't feel like it was done for the purpose of just gratuitous violence or anything like that, because the film isn't completely about that. But when it does show certain moments, it does not spare the viewer. So you have to have, I think, a strong now, it didn't bother me to the level that scene in Bone Tomahawk did, except for the part about the pulling something out of the just thinking about it makes me want to heave. It didn't bother me to that level, which is weird because Bone Tomahawk was not an outright horror movie like this was, but it was very effective in making you feel disturbed and making you feel uneasy the entire time, because you just really didn't know what was going to happen. It was not predictable, which was something else that I liked about it. Though I did have some cons, and most of it was just because it felt like there were some moments, especially towards the end, where it felt like the writing got a little bit weak. And I don't know if it was because maybe there had been some edits made that caused me to notice certain holes in what was happening. And I'll touch on those later. I wanted to get back to the things that I liked. I mentioned that feeling of dread that this film gave me, and I liked that it generated that feeling in me. Also, it made you feel, so there's this situation as he's the main character. I think his name is, no, his brother's name is Jaime. I forgot what the main character's name is. Whatever, the main brother, the dude who looks like Hugh Jackman. That's who he reminded me of. Him, right there. So he's trying to get his family out of what he knows is a bad situation that's coming. And when he finds himself in a situation, things have really amped up. They've gotten pretty bad. Things are desperate. There's this moment in the car a couple times where he does not know what to do. He's got a person in the car with him who's autistic and keeps making these constant noises, which is just the tension. It makes the tension go up in you, the viewer, because there's that distraction. Then he's got his brother's giving him a distraction because trying to talk to him and figure out what's going on, and he doesn't have the answers. And he's so frustrated, and something horrific has just happened, and he just does not know what to do. He's kind of acting on instinct with trying to get away, but then, that's not necessarily going to solve the problem. So you can just feel the desperation that this situation is out of control, and it feels palpable to you. You can completely identify with the emotion that this main character must be feeling. I'm sure we've all been in a situation similar, like where we're really stressed about, and obviously not similar, not literally similar, but where you're at a point where you're so stressed and there's just things coming at you from all, and you just don't know what to do, and you just need a moment to think, but you know what I mean? That sort of thing. So I thought they pulled that off really well. There was a quote in here that one of the characters said about evil and how that evil likes children and children like evil. That particular quote comes about right before there's a situation that happens involving some children. And I was thinking, well, that's an interesting quote. It made me wonder about the validity of it, because children seem to be so innocent, and they're so pure, and they're so sweet. And then I was thinking, well, a lot of times children, depending on their environment and the things they are exposed to repeatedly, has almost everything to do with how they grow up as adults, and that shapes them in good or bad ways. And I was thinking about some of the stuff that it feels like a lot of children today are exposed to, things that a lot of people feel, rightly so, are not suitable. And yet there seems to be this constant push for exposure of these things to very young children, which is going to mess with their mind in ways that is not good. And some people would call that sort of thing evil. I was thinking about this along those lines and thinking how that if children are exposed to something that is not good for them and they don't know any better, they grow to love this thing or to like this thing or to be influenced by this thing that is not good for them. And I wondered if that's kind of where that quote was coming from. I'm honestly not sure, but curious to know your thoughts. I knew that quote was going to be in there because Paulie from Latino Slant had mentioned it in his Out of the Theater review. So I was curious to see when it was going to happen and in what context. Anyway, that was just something I thought of. And speaking of the Latino Slant, I think we're going to have a live stream spoilery discussion about this film, which I hope it happens because I've got some questions that I wasn't sure about and just wondering if there's something that I missed. I think I have gone through all of the pros, so I want to turn now to the cons, and some of those cons tie into the stuff I was just mentioning about things I was confused about or things that I missed, but also tying into things that I felt were lacking in the writing. One of the things that I was confused about, and maybe we'll have this discussion on the live stream if we have the live stream, was that why did this demonic entity or whatever it was, why did it infect or embed itself in some people and not others? Part of that was explained a little bit when one of the characters was saying something about how there are certain minds that it can't necessarily get into and take control of. So maybe that's why. I still question that given its exposure to some of the characters. I don't know, that maybe that's something for a different discussion. Another thing was there's a part in the movie where they end up going to a school, and I wasn't exactly sure why they were going to the school because I don't think that was their intended target initially when they set out in the direction that they went. That might also be something for the discussion. Some other stuff, not necessarily that I didn't understand, but this was where I feel like there were some issues with the writing, and maybe some of that was because of edits. There's a character that they know is in a particular place. They leave this character with someone. Then they come back, and one of those characters is not there anymore. And they don't think to question what happened. They didn't wonder at all. And then in a few scenes later, when it's revealed what happened to this person, there's so much shock that they experience by discovering it, or that one of the characters experiences. But I'm thinking to myself, didn't this person wonder well before this happened? Didn't you wonder? Where was so-and-so? When I went back? That felt a little wonky to me. So, I don't know about that part. And then also, they're in a place. Two of the characters are in a location, and there's a group of children standing in a certain place. And then in a subsequent shot, there's only one child standing there. All the others are gone. And that was weird because it hadn't shown them leave. There's no indication at all on screen or within the dialogue that the children had gone somewhere. So that was either an issue with the angle of the camera, or that was just an editing blooper. I don't think it was an issue with the camera angle, because I'm pretty sure the initial angle of the camera was the same as when it first showed the kids all standing there as it was when it later showed all the rest of the kids were gone except one. That jumped out at me. Something else that got a little bit under my skin was something that one of the characters did, very similar to what I mentioned in No One Will Save You, turning his back on a doorway when there's a bunch of creepy stuff going on and some disturbing people around. And why are you turning your back on an open doorway? That's not to say anything happened. I'm just saying I would not be turning my back on an open doorway in a situation like that. So that jumped out at me. And then one of the last things that bothered me a little was there's a situation at the very end. One of the characters does something that they should not do, of course, because if that didn't happen, then this other plot point can't happen. But the way it was carried out was frustrating to me because this character already knew what they were dealing with. Up to that point, they'd already been exposed to so much stuff that they knew how insidious this entity was and could be. So when this character then proceeded to do something against the advice of another person that was right there with them, that was frustrating because I don't feel like this character should have made that mistake given everything that was already known and everything that this person had already been exposed to. While I get that the point was to move the story in a particular direction, that particular moment felt pretty weak to me because it just didn't make sense given what I knew about that character already and what that character knew about the situation as well. Those were some of my cons, not really major cons. The effectiveness of this movie and the storytelling and the really solid acting more than makes up for the issues that I had that happened along the way. Most of those issues were things that occurred at the very end. And maybe these are things that can be cleared up and understood a little bit better if we have that live stream discussion. And whenever I know if that's going to happen, I will let you guys know so that maybe you can join us in the comment section on Polly's channel. I think that's all I have to say about this film. I was very pleased that this was a much better experience than what I went through last night with The Exorcist Believer, which was ultimately a disappointment. It's just interesting to me that both of these movies are coming out around the same time. So this is having a pretty limited release on the big screen from what I understand, but I think by the end of October, it's going to be available on Shudder. So if you have a subscription to Shudder, you can check it out. And I think that's... Did you get a new brace?
No, this is Javier's. I was showing you like...
Let me wrap this up real quick. Hold on a second. That's it. I am wrapping this up and we'll see you guys later. Nos vemos. That was a pretty horrific horror movie.
Really?
Yeah, maybe you'd like to watch it sometime. It'll be on Shudder.